This is Jeff Mucci with RCR Wireless News. We're in Reston, Virginia today with Tom Stroup, who's CEO of Shared Spectrum. Tom, thanks for joining us.
Happy to be here.
We've got a workshop going on today that's called a DAS workshop, D-A-S. Your company focuses on something called DSA. Can you talk about what that means and what you do?
DSA is dynamic spectrum access, and it's a sensing technology that basically senses what frequencies are available and what are being used, so that if you're ever subject to interference, it automatically switches to those frequencies that are available, those that are unused.
So who uses that technology today?
Today it's being used by the military. The problem that we were initially solving is that when soldiers are deployed into the field, they don't know what frequencies are going to be available in foreign countries. So they needed the ability to be able to automatically tune their radios to spectrum that was available. That project was then modified to be able to address what happens when they're subject to jamming. So within milliseconds, we switch to frequencies that are available even though the radios are subject to jamming. And it does this by continuously sensing what frequencies are being used, what are available, and switches to those that are available when they're subject to interference.
And you've described your company as a software company. However, there wasn't a lot of hardware out there that was making equipment that could be used in the field. So tell me about the focus of the company going forward relative to a software company and a hardware company.
We developed hardware to be able to demonstrate how the technology works because we were working with a small quantity of radios at the time. We have since ported it over to existing radio systems, those manufactured by Harris, by Thales, and we're working with companies like Raytheon, Boeing, and other radio manufacturers that are currently making military radio systems. So our desire isn't to be a hardware manufacturer, we're a software company, and that's our focus.
We've also talked about opportunities in the white space. You were hired a year ago, as I understand it, to really move the company from a military-oriented company to a commercial company. Tell us about some of the opportunities as you see it.
That's absolutely right. My background is in the wireless industry. It's not the deep background in the military. And we see the greater opportunity for this technology in the commercial sector. We think that the first area is going to be within the TV white spaces. The FCC has come out with some initial rules as to how the TV white spaces could be used, and it involves checking a database and sensing to make sure that when you are using a device, you're not causing interference to either TV stations or to wireless microphones, or ultimately to other TV white spaces devices. So we see that as the first application for the technology. And it could be used, TV white spaces can be used for a number of different types of technologies. So it can range from in-home use, various types of consumer appliances. Another that we've been contacted about is femtocells, being able to use the TV white spaces for the backhaul component of it, to a very innovative use using low-power TV stations to basically provide mobile video capabilities. And our technology would play a role in utilizing any of those.
What sort of timeline are you looking at for the commercialization of the technology?
The expectation is that the FCC will finalize the TV white space rules by the third quarter of this year, and our expectation is that we'll start deploying within 6 to 12 months after that. People have been reluctant to really move forward aggressively within the TV white spaces until they know what the rules are going to be. One of the remaining issues outstanding is what the power limitations are going to be. So the rules that were developed are probably more appropriate for urban areas. One of the other applications for the technology would be for rural backhaul and using TV white spaces. So those are some of the things still to be resolved by the Commission. And then there's one other area that is likely to follow shortly behind that as part of the mobile broadband proceeding. The FCC has specifically identified that they will come out with the rulemaking in the third quarter is to identify spectrum that will be made available for DSA and other sharing technologies.
Now, is that related to the 500 megahertz of additional spectrum the FCC is looking to allocate, or is that a separate issue?
It is related to the 500 megahertz they're seeking to identify. And the challenge for the Commission is that 500 megahertz is a huge swath of spectrum. It's all currently being used by someone else, or virtually all of it's being used by someone else. And the typical reallocation process takes 6 to 10 years. Those existing users are not going to say, sure, no problem, we'll move. They're going to resist. And our tests, as tests of others, have shown that while almost all of the spectrum is allocated, most of it's not used. We've done tests in New York, Chicago, Washington, and a variety of rural areas, and less than a third of the spectrum is being used at any time. So the real challenge is being able to better utilize that spectrum.
And in your in layman's terms, could you describe what TV white space means?
Sure, sure. So I think a good example would be you've got two cities, let's say Washington and Philadelphia, and you've got Channel 7 that is allocated to both of them. Well, if they're too close together, they'll cause interference to each other.
Right.
So you need to have a geographical separation. In addition, there's a spectral separation that takes place. So you don't have two channels bumping up right next to each other. There's a guard band that's created. And so there's spectrum that's not being used, both geographically and spectrally. And so the white spaces is those areas that could be used but currently are not.
And just to close the loop, your technology identifies those open areas and allows for utilization of that open spectrum.
Exactly, exactly. So it's sensing what is available, what is being used. And one of the interesting byproducts of what we've done is we've removed the need for expensive filters so that in an adjacent channel situation, today you avoid interference very often by having filters, and they're often very expensive. So if you've got sensing technology, you don't need to have that same capability because you can sense if that spectrum is being used and switch to a different frequency.
Okay. You've been a veteran of the industry for 20 plus years. We're entering a new era with smartphones and social networking and TV white space. How does today look to you compared to 20, 25 years ago when cell phones and mobile phone and cellular phones were being conceived? Compare and contrast today from 25 years ago.
Well, certainly one of the interesting differences is 25 years ago, there was a question as to whether this was a viable industry in anything other than the top 25 or 30 markets in the country. Yeah. Certainly we've gone well beyond that. At the time, people only conceived of it for voice communications. The whole concept was phone in a car. How do you use a phone in the car? And so today, there's a multitude of applications. This is basically a wireless internet access device. The fact that it also has this voice capability is interesting to some people. That's not even how most people use it. When I'm asked to identify applications for the future, the way I like to respond is 20 years ago, nobody could predict how the industry would unfold. There are 20 and 25-year-olds out there who are growing up with this technology that will develop applications that you and I can't even conceive of. And so I don't think that any of us are smart enough to be able to identify what the industry looks like 20 or 25 years from now. It's going to be very different, but almost everybody already has a device, so that will continue. It's just how they use it is going to differ.
Tom, in closing, what's been the most exciting part of your new role as CEO of Shared Spectrum?
It's been exciting to take a technology that has such a tremendous opportunity and basically lay the groundwork for the move from the military to the commercial sector. And the administration, Congress, the FCC are all very interested in this technology because it's essentially it's an internet-like story. DARPA was very involved in the creation of the internet. They have been very involved in the creation of this technology, deployed into the military. The next step is to deploy it into the commercial sector.
Tom, thanks for joining us today.
Jeff, I've enjoyed it.